Back. So, we were just talking about your brother and that transition and talking about Dan. One of the things that I thought we'd go back a little bit in time and I'd ask you about is kind of courtship and marriage. When did you first get married, and how did you meet your first wife?
I first met Ellen when she was living with two other girls in Los Angeles in an apartment, and I met one of the girls on a train because I was bounced off. I had a priority to fly. I was flying under priority, but the military out-prioritied me, even though I was doing, essential work.
Right.
And I was coming back from Chicago. I'd been to Chicago on business. We had there was this one subcontractor that I was working with in Chicago. And my flight was, anyway, I was out ranked by, I don't know, colonel or somebody else. And so I was on the train. It was, I think it was the city of Los Angeles, either that or the super chief, one of the others that went into L.A. And of course I was single then, and I always looked for lady companions. And so I went up and down the train and in the club car, and I saw this good-looking red-headed gal sitting and reading a magazine in the coffee club car. And so I sat down beside her and we started to talk, and then we sat together on a great lot of the trip, and I dated her when we got back to Los Angeles. Virginia Morgan, her name was, and she was a good friend of Ellen's. And I had tickets to the operetta, the season tickets to the operetta, and she would go with me. And this one time, something happened. I think she had some other engagement, or some better offer came along. I don't know. And when I called her, and it was Ellen who answered, and said, "Well, Jenny isn't here. Something else happened." And I said, "Well, I have," because I'd met Ellen before, and I said, "Well, I have tickets to the operetta, and I was wondering if Jenny was going to go, but are you free that night?" And she said, "Yes, I am." So we went to the operetta, and then we had dinner together, and one thing led to another, and her parents were Baptist missionaries, and we had a great deal in common. And she had come out from Ohio, and Denison University, which was just east of Columbus. And my mother would go up to Denison to teach Bible seminars, and so I was familiar with Denison, very familiar, and one thing led to another. We had so much in common, and she was a good-looking, lovely lady, and so we were married.
Wow. And were you married back in Ohio?
No, we were married in Los Angeles. My dad came out to perform the ceremony.
Oh, he did?
That was in 1944, September of 1944.
I see. Now, what had Ellen been doing here in California? What was she?
Well, she'd come out with her folks. She had 3 years at Denison, and then her dad was taking some graduate work at USC, and so Ellen transferred to USC for graduation, and then she went to work for the telephone company. And this is where the other girls were working. I think Virginia Morgan, her friend through whom I met Ellen, was working there, and another very good friend of ours for many years until she died. She was a girl named Ruby Wing. Anyway, the three of them were living together. Oh, there were four of them because there was a large apartment, big studio apartment, and I guess you call it a studio apartment, upstairs, downstairs, and a number of bedrooms. But they were working. Most of them were working for the telephone company. There were four girls living together.
I see. I see. And where did you set up your first household together?
Our first household was a larger apartment on Serrano Avenue. I had a smaller apartment, and then we got a one-bedroom apartment on Serrano Avenue in the Ambassador District of Los Angeles. It was, and then when we conceived, when Ellen was pregnant, we knew. Then we moved to. Then we moved down into southwest Los Angeles, because places were very difficult to get then. Houses.
Yes.
And there was owned by a fellow who was in the service, and I guess his wife was she was away or whatever. Anyway, we rented that. And that was where we lived when Chris was born. And I remember, especially, we had a nurse for Chris, and I was flying then. I had this plane that I owned half of with another fellow, this little Piper Cub, and I told Ellen that I was going to fly over, and I remember that she was out there in the yard with a nurse, and the nurse was holding Chris, the baby, and I did a couple of wingovers, and I was dumb. I wasn't that good a pilot, I was fooling around there, and suddenly the engine cut. And so I switched the mags back and forth, and you have to get the nose down to keep the propeller going, and it did catch again, because there was no place around there. Well, there was one place for an emergency landing, but I'm not sure I could have reached it, if the engine hadn't come back on. And so I thought, you're just stupid, John. Here you are, a father with a new baby. Yeah. And you're flying this old, monoplane, which was about, it was a pre-war airplane. And so I got back and I called old Harold Call, the fellow with whom I owned it. I said, do you want to buy the whole plane? I said, I'll give you a good price. And so I sold my half to him. I did fly later on with, when I was in business, a fellow wanted to sell me a Cessna. He had, and I almost bought it, but I didn't. But he'd let me fly it, rent it, or not rent it, but go ahead, take it out again. And but anyway, I never did buy another plane. I'm just as well off.
Yeah. But you then how soon did you have your second child?
Stan was born in 1948.
I see.
Chris was born in August of 45, and Stan was born in November of 48.
I see.
And I was, when Stan was born, when Ellen was getting close to delivery time, but I was on a sales trip. I had started this manufacturing business, and I was back in Texas. And I got a call from Ellen's father that he said, because I kept in touch, you know, and tell him where I would be. This was long before cell phones.
Yeah.
But he knew what hotel I was going to be at, and I talked to him. He called me and he said, "You're the father of a son. Ellen delivered earlier than I had thought that she had that she would. Than we thought.
Right.
It was about a week early, and because I'd planned to be back, of course. So I hightailed it on back to Huntington Hospital and saw my first and only son.
Now, had you been a little disappointed when you had a girl the first time?
No. Oh no. No, I was hoping for a son. I thought if I had a choice, I'll have a son. But even Chris is an unusual lady, and she was an unusual baby even.
Oh, really?
Where she was at Cedars of Lebanon Hospital, which is primarily a Jewish hospital because the pediatrician or the obstetrician that we had was Dr. Turkel, who was a Jewish physician, and all of his deliveries were at Cedars of Lebanon. And when I would go in to see Chris in the baby ward, you know, the room with all the babies, I could always spot her because she was the only blonde-headed, white-haired baby in the whole room. And so no, I was just so pleased to be a daddy.
And what was Chris like as a kid? As a child, and how do you remember her?
Well, she was always a delight. She would, when I'd come home, especially from a trip, she'd put her arms around my legs and say, "Oh, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy," and she was always very bright and very personable, and with her little pigtails and her big eyes, and she was a delightful baby and delightful child. Of course, I'm prejudiced, but objectively, she was. She really was.
Well, and her sons said they had the thought that maybe she was kind of a goody-goody sort of type, though. Was that true, or did she ever?
No, she was not at all.
No.
No, she was very popular in school. She was. I'll tell you a story on Chris.
Good.
She was what's called a flag girl. She was elected to be a flag girl, and that was six. I think there were either six or eight girls who at the games, would hold the flags and wave them around and so forth, and that was quite an honor. And then the teacher who was the head of the flag girls, I forget his name, a very nice guy, he said, "Now we're going to elect the head of the flag girl, the head flag girl, who sort of masterminded the whole thing and was the leader." And he said, we'll just vote on it. This is
right.
what Ellen has told me, and then Chris has told me the same thing anyway. And so they all voted, and when they counted the votes, it was unanimous. And Chris, and Chris was very embarrassed, and because obviously she voted for herself. And I said, "Well, why do you worry about it? Mr. Da-da-da said, vote for the girl that you think could do the best job as head flag girl." And I said, "And you just thought you were doing the best job?" And she said, "Yes, I did." So.
Oh, that's great.
So she became head flag girl. And she was, in the yearbook, which I have in my library, she was voted excuse me, she was voted the best all-around girl in the school, or in the graduating class. So there was nothing goody-goody about Chris.
Well, good. That's good. I'm glad the truth is getting out on that. Well, and how about when she got old enough to start dating? How did you feel about that?
Well, she nearly always dated guys that I approved of, and of course I was always apprehensive when she would drive away with a guy,
Mm-hmm.
and any parent is concerned,
Right.
especially when a daughter starts dating, but I didn't trammel her in any way. Although we did have one New Year's when she ended up going with a guy that we did not want her to go with,
Oh.
and it was around the parade, I believe. Anyway, Ellen and I went down and we saw her and we picked her up and brought her back.
Oh, you did.
But she did not necessarily resent it. She was a little upset at first, but
Right.
yeah. But she usually dated very nice guys that I approved of.
And how was fatherhood for you in those early years? How did you enjoy it? Did you?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I'm sorry that I had to be away from home so much. And then Ellen and I was back in New York, and my secretary called and said, Mr. McKenna called and said, get in touch with him right away, that Ellen had filed for divorce when I was back east. Oh. And so I called Jack, and he said, yeah, she filed, and Mr. The name of her attorney, and who was a well-known attorney, in Los Angeles, and he said you're going to have to file a countersuit, a counter action, because and the name is her attorney just slips me now, but anyway, so and I think Ellen wanted to bring me around so that I wouldn't be traveling as much, and I was, my business was going well, and we were just buying out our competitor from back east, and I was spending too much time in the business. This had nothing to do with the engineering business. I was manufacturing children's furniture items.
Right, and I do want to ask you about that because I know they're quite interested. But that business, or being in business, was the biggest issue or a big issue in the marriage.
It was, yeah. It was a big issue, and I must say that I regret the fact that Ellen and I were ever divorced.
Oh, really?
At the time, it was a little upsetting, but I let the divorce go ahead and go through.
But in retrospect?
In retrospect. In a retrospect, I regret it. Yeah.
I see. And how did it go with the kids? The kids, I don't even know what ages they were exactly when that occurred.
Well, Chris was, I think Chris was 17. Let's see, I can, 45. Yeah, Chris was either 16 or 17, and Stan was about 13.
So Stan stayed at home with Ellen.
Yes.
And Chris was maybe on.
She was going away to school.
Right.
Yeah.
I see. And was it a shock to them, do you think?
Well, I think it was. I think it was, and I think that it had a deleterious effect especially on Stan. Yes, I think it was a shock to them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was a traumatic experience for them.
Yeah, yes. And was it difficult because of, I mean, with lawyers and all, was it there, what we would call a difficult divorce then?
Well, a difficult divorce?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I would call it a difficult divorce. I'm not sure I want to even put this in the.
Sure, that's fine.
This should be off the record, but just so you would know, Ellen's reasons for the divorce, it was an older judge, didn't hold up really, and the judge insisted that I take the divorce because I had filed a counter action.
Yes, yes.
And I told my attorney, Jack McKenna, who was a Harvard attorney and a good friend, I said, Jack, I do not want the divorce. This would kill Ellen. Because at that time, it was before the no-fault divorce.
Yes.
And if a wife couldn't, if the husband would get the divorce, it was a bad reflection on the wife.
Yes.
And Jack said, you're going to have to take it. Otherwise, you're going to have to go through the whole thing again. Because when the judge granted you a divorce, you had filed for a counteraction for divorce, you have to take it. And so it was a very traumatic thing for me because I knew what it would do to Ellen. And it really upset Ellen. And I knew it would. And so Ellen went to a rehab home, Presbyterian home out east of where we lived in La Cañada, and I would go out to visit her. You know, we were still very good friends, and of course I would see the kids often. We went to Aspen together when Chris was working over after she graduated, and she was over at Aspen skiing. And Ellen and I and Stan and Stan's then girlfriend went to Aspen. We were all together for a week, and we'd go various places together. And but it was a very difficult time emotionally for her, you know, and lesser so for me.
Well, could we talk a little bit about your, just to put it in the time frame, and because it's relevant here, talk a little bit about your second business. How did that come about, and you know, how did you create that second business?
This could take I'm going to shorten this, but anyway, Ellen, I'll start out basically. Ellen was a Kappa. No, I better. When the engineering business evaporated, you know, because it was all defense. After the war, a friend of mine at Douglas, who was one of the engineers at Douglas, called and said, he was put in charge of all the surplus equipment. And he said, John, he said, I have 8 automatic tube benders down here, and if nobody buys them before Saturday, I'm going to declare them salvage, and you'll have to get them for just practically nothing, the weight of the material. So I said, sure, I'll take them. And if they're not, so he called and he said, get down here right away because nobody made a bid on them. And so I took a truck down, picked them up, and I had rented a place for some other equipment that I had in an alley in Los Angeles. And so I dumped them off there. And then shortly after that, and I didn't know what I was going to do with them, but shortly, but I knew I could sell them at a profit. And shortly after that, we went to a Kappa party. Ella, as I say, Ellen was a Kappa sorority, and the alumni had a party here, and I met this other fellow who was a husband of a friend of Ellen's, who was also a Kappa. She was a Kappa from USC, or from UCLA. And I met Fred Golding, and we got along well together, and Fred was looking for something to do, and after the war, and I was looking for something. And so we said, let's get together. And Fred had some wagons that he had made because they couldn't get wagons, and so I helped him sell them. Anyway, one thing led to another, and so Fred and I got together, and we started a company called Pride Products Company, and we weren't sure what we were going to do, but then I thought of these tube benders that I had, and well, then at another party, we met the assistant buyer for Robinson's department store in the baby department, and she said, "We're looking for baby dressing tables. We can't get enough of them because a lot of people were having babies then, and this was 1946, and so I thought, I guess Fred and I said, well, we'll make some dressing table, and so we bought some aluminum and aluminum tubing, and I sold I sold 6 of those 8 tube benders, and then we kept 2, and we bent up a frame, and we bought some peroxylin coated material, pink and blue, for boys and girls. And we made a folding dressing table that was self-supporting. And so I took it to Robinson's, or Fred took it to Robinson's then, and she bought it, and then we took it to the buying offices. The stores throughout the country had buying offices in California. Anyway, one thing led to another. Then we made a baby bath. One of the buyers from back east said, "We can't get enough baby baths, so why don't you make a baby bath, like a bassinet?" So we hung a tub on it and anyway. So one thing led to another, and then we improved the line, and we were the second largest in the baby furniture business. It was mostly, we didn't do wood, we did metal. And we made strollers and high chairs and play yards and all of that, car seats, all of that stuff. But everything, the timing was right then too. Yeah, because the guys were coming home from the service and having babies, and then in 1962, I had a chance I knew the head of Trimble, our big competitor, and baby baths and baby folding cribs and so forth, back in Rochester, New York. They just built a new plant in Southern Pines, North Carolina. And Beau Depew was, he was the owner, he was the chairman and owned most of the stock. And I was at a market one time, at the furniture market one time, and he, out of the blue, he said, "John," he said, "are you interested in buying us out?" And I said, "Beau, I never thought of it." I said, "I don't know whether we could handle that." And so I went to a friend of mine, a Jewish fellow who had made various investments back east, and he was living in Brentwood, California. And that is not the Brentwood up north, but the Brentwood, the suburb of Los Angeles. And I said, "Phil, we have a chance to buy Trimble. Can you give me any advice on this?" And so Phil sort of masterminded it and the deal, and we ended up buying out our competitor. And when their salesman had said, "Well, we can shut down pride anytime we feel like, you know, because, and then we ended up buying the whole thing. And I will never forget that great feeling. We contracted with Cole, Friedman, and Dietz, a Wall Street firm of attorneys, you know, to handle the deal. And I remember the afternoon. That was in August of 1962, the afternoon that we signed all the papers, and Trimble was ours. And I looked out the window. They had on the, I don't know, the 50th floor of one of the Wall Street buildings, and I saw the United States, the big liner, going out of the East River, and or the Hudson. It was docked over in the Hudson, and that big United States going out, it was a majestic sight because you could look over from Wall Street and see the, you know, the U.S. docks. And just bought Trimble, our competitor, for many, many years, and I thought, this is really living. And it was, I think it was one of the most high peaks of my career.
That's a great memory. Wow. Yeah, that's fantastic. And how did that go then? Did it prove to be a successful transition into the new
Well,
ownership?
yes, it was, but it was a very difficult transition because, you know, in some of the items we had to drop some, you know, from theirs and their line and our line. And we ended up, all of the eastern shipments would go out of Trimble, and the western shipments would go out of Glendale, California. And we'd ship cars, Trimble would load a car with the merchandise that we did not make, that Trimble made, and then we would, you know, unload it and ship it out of Glendale. And one time, we, one of the cars was there with a dunnage in it, and our warehouse was over on Paloma Avenue in Glendale, and there were some kids who got into the car, you know, because there was a space between our building and the, you know, the door for the our warehouse building and the car itself, and we'd in order to unload it, we had to put a ramp across. But anyway, kids got into the car because the door was open. We had already emptied it, and whoever emptied it in our, you know, my employee didn't close the door, but all the dunnage was there. They set it on fire, and then that caught the warehouse on fire, and it was the biggest fire in Glendale that year. That was in '63. And so that was an experience.
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
And anyway, as it turned out, that I had two other stockholders in the business, and they both wanted to retire. Fred Golding, who had been with me a long time, and Phil Ross, we gave him some stock when he helped me buy Trimble. They wanted to get their money out and retire, and we sold out to a conglomerate, and that was the worst business decision I ever made, because that didn't work out at all.
Meaning to say you lost money, or just that the company, when you say it didn't work out, what do you mean?
Well, I took stock. The rest of them, the others took cash and paid the tax, and I didn't want to pay tax because I owned quite a bit of stock.
Sure.
And so I took stock in the conglomerate. And then about that time, the golden age of conglomerates was not was not around. People decided that the Wall Street decided that all these various types of businesses trying to get together, the combination was not a good, viable combination.
Yes.
And so the stock went down and down, and I tried to get my business at Glendale back, and they wouldn't sell. I stayed on as president for a while. I was no longer chairman of the board, and it was just a bad arrangement. I was unhappy about it, and then I quit, and I ended up with debentures that I finally cashed in. Anyway, it was a very, very bad arrangement for me.
Mm-hmm. And that was the mid-'60s by that time?
No, that was, the late 60s.
Late
that
60s.
was, yeah, that was 68 or 69.
I see. And how, when you had the terrible fire, but you were able to sustain the company through that?
Yeah, well, yeah, we were, because we had insurance, and I was a member of YPO, the Young Presidents Organization,
Mm-hmm.
and one of my friends in YPO, you know, they'd read about the fire, and I was talking to him about it at one of the meetings. You've heard of YPO?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, and he said, look, you get a guy who came out here, and he said, we had a smaller fire, and Sidney Greenspan really helped us, and I got this, who was an adjuster, and I got Sidney, I called Sidney, and so we retained him, and it helped a great deal, because he was able to, you know, he knew what to do with these insurance companies if they try to wiggle out of paying what they should. So yeah, but this was before we sold out.
Yes.
Yeah, this fire was before we sold
63.
out. Yeah, but it didn't. No, we recovered from that okay.
And just to go back for a second, what exactly is dunnage? Is that's just the material that?
That's the material that was used to pack so that the goods wouldn't be damaged.
I see.
You know, Excelsior and paper, you know, packing,
Right,
and
right.
cardboard blocking and so forth.
Yes.
Very inflammable.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, when you bought the other company, did they also do the aluminum tubing type of furniture, or was their style different than yours?
Their style was a little different. They were in aluminum on some of their items, but they had a kiddie coop. We made ours out of aluminum tubing that was foldable, and it had a plastic screen that we'd electronically weld to the plastic itself, and it folded up. But they had the kiddie coop that was made. They called it the kiddie coop, and it was wood frame. They made it down at a plant in Dothan, Alabama. And when we took over, we continued making the kiddie coops down in Dothan, Alabama, and we subcontracted it. One of the deals that when we took over was to sell the Dothan plant, so that we would reduce our costs of the plant at Southern Pines, and but the outfit who took it over continued to make the kiddie coop. Well, we had a lawsuit that a child was choked to death on the kiddie coop. The child stood up, and the mother had not snapped the lid down so that the child could not raise up. And yes. If you can picture what I'm talking about, it was a hinged lid with a wood frame.
So it was kind of like a crib.
It was like
what do you call this? Yeah, it was like a little enclosure, but it had a top on it.
Yeah, it had a top, and it had a wood frame, and it would fold up. But the mother had not snapped it down, and so the child stood up in the crib, and put its head out, and then it couldn't get it back in. And it just literally hung itself. And so our insurance, liability insurance, settled that for a big amount. It should have been a big amount, and so I decided that no more. We were, you know, the only crib that we would have would be our folding crib that we made, and so we dropped that crib.
I see. Now, and can you remember when you may have first have heard the term baby boom?
Remember when we first
heard it? Is that a term you knew from early on? I don't know when.
Well, I followed the demographics, you know, the births per 1,000 adults, and they were very high. I'm trying to think whether it was 25 births per 1,000 adults, something like that. Anyway, it was very high, and then it started to slope on back down, you know, drop off. But it maintained a very high level into the, I would say into the, it was very high right after, you know, a few months after the war for a couple of years. And then it stayed on that level, and then it started to drop off in, I would say, in the late 60s it started to drop off.
I see. And, you know, I understand that that you did an ad one time where you put Chris into the photo.
Oh, yes.
Remember that?
Oh, yes. That was our first advertisement. And we took, in fact, I think I took the picture on that. I can't recall. And Ellen is standing by Chris, and Chris is on the little dressing table that we had. I still have some copies of those, and that would be fun to put in the video.
Yeah, definitely.
And Chris was lying on her tummy, and she had her head up like this, and Ellen was looking. It was really a very, very nice picture.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, you know, something else that, speaking of business matters from that period of time, I think Justin asked me, he said he heard a story that he wasn't sure if it was true or not, where somebody came to you with a proposal about a certain kind of pen.
Oh, that was long ago. And when I was in the engineering business, I had a fellow who was not a partner, but I brought him in to help me out, and I did give him a share of the profits. And he was a pilot, and he had his own plane then, and we knew that at the end of the war, you know, the engineering business was going to collapse, and so I sent Ed back. And he flew his Aranca chief going back east, and there was an ad from a Philadelphia company who wanted representation out here. It was called Precision Tube Company. And we picked up 2 or 3 other lines, Ed did, you know, back there that we were going to handle out here. Some hose clamps. We got the clamp that the woman who would fighting she owned the company back in Connecticut or back east, that she was fighting the IRS. You probably don't remember that, but she was very notorious, and she owned this company and making cable clamps. Cable clamps. And so we got that line, and anyway, one of the lines was this Precision Tube Company. And we had the whole West Coast. And then Ed and I parted company because we also had the Aranca distributorship for California, for Southern California. And they wanted us to put more, because everybody thought the golden age of aviation had arrived at the end of the war, that all of the guys coming back, the pilots would want airplanes in their yard, and you know, and so forth. And it wasn't so, but anyway, the Aranca company out of Middletown, Ohio, they made some good private airplanes, small, you know, and and we had the distributorship for I guess it was Southern California. Southern California, and they kept wanting us to put more money into hangars and space, you know, mechanical space, you know, for servicing and so forth. And I just couldn't. I was going to be running out of money before we could do all of that. So I said, Ed, you go ahead and take, because on these lines that he brought back, we were partners, 50-50 partners. I said, you go ahead and take it, and leave me out of the aircraft business, and I'll take the cable clamps and the tubing. And so that was okay with him, because he'd already talked to a guy who had built a lot of the Quonset huts, and who had up in Nevada, and this fellow wanted to get into the aircraft business. And so Ed went up and talked to him, and said, you're in. He said, you can, I'll bring the distributorship, you put up the money and so forth. So anyway, they went along, they did that, and it went along for about a year, and then this guy Brown pulled out, because they just weren't selling enough airplanes to keep it up and so forth. But anyway, the tubing was, that helped us get started in the baby furniture business. Because the table clamps we didn't do too well with, and I dropped that line, but the tubing I sold to BB Pen Company and to Papermate Pen and Sloan Pen, and all of the pen companies used, because it was very precision tubing, 1/8 diameter, and I think it was 18,000 or 10 thousandths wall. I still remember. And with Papermate, that was started. I can give you how that even got started, but I'm not going to go into that. But anyway, they came to me and said, we'll give you a part interest in Papermate if you can assure us of a steady supply and give us 30-day terms. And I thought about that, and I'm sure that I could have gotten Norman Jack, who owned the Precision Tube, to go along with it, but I thought I really don't want to risk that, because I was getting started in the baby furniture business then. And so I turned Papermate down, and then Papermate sold out 2 or 3 years after that to the shaver company. Gillette, yeah. And I could have ended up with quite a lot, but that was another one of my mistakes. But I just thought it was too risky, because they didn't have very good credit at that time. And anyway, it was, someday I'll tell you how Papermate got into the pen business.
Well, you can tell.
But I'm not going to, no, I won't get into that now. But anyway, we missed it.
Well, something that Dan talked about, because Dan spoke of how much you came into his life, of course, after his father died, and so much of of the memories in the family seem to be associated with with camping, skiing, outdoor stuff. And do you want to talk about that, like how that's the part that's played in your life, the outdoors?
Well, I've always loved the outdoors, and I'm very pleased and gratified that Chris is the same way, and also Stan. Stan likes to do a lot of camping. And we would go camping, actually packing into the mountains from the time that Chris was a little girl and Stan was a little guy, riding horses and spotting in the High Sierra. And Chris loved it, and Stan did too, and we've done a lot of that. And I took up skiing many years ago in the 40s, early 40s, and really enjoyed it. And so I would take Chris. In fact, the first, when Chris was really young, I'd put her in a backpack and put her on my back and go skiing. So even before and then she started very early. And Chris is a wonderful skier now. She's a competitive skier. She's a terrific skier. And she also loves hiking and the outdoors. And And Dan Dan was with us on many trips, both to go up skiing and then also packing into the mountains.
Mm-hmm.
And Dan was always a great guy. He and Stan and I we packed in a few times, just the three of us. Other times there would be more, to the party, when Chris would be along too.
Right.
But well, that's always been a big part of my life and my love.
Yes, yeah. Chris she had a couple stories that she remembered. One had to do something with a record player with cactus needles. Do you remember that story? Something about cactus needles on a record player? Maybe I've gotten it wrong.
About
cactus needles? Something about cactus needles.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. On the we had a I forget what record player it was. It was I went all out to buy that one record player, but I would get cactus needles. They would wear out, but they gave a very mellow tone. And I'd pick up cactus needles and then bring them home, and then I'd use them and sharpen them a little. And yeah, so I used cactus needles on the record player. She remembered that, huh?
Oh yeah, she remembered that. She also remembered a story about something to do with when she was out. They were out hiking, and she was little. She was a little girl when you were out, and something you found a deer's head, or somebody had a deer's head in a backpack. Do you remember something about a decapitated deer?
I vaguely do, but I can't. In my computerized memory, I can't quite reach that.
Yeah. I don't remember the.
I remember this. I vaguely remember something about that. Yeah. A deer's head. And she would say, "Oh, the poor deer's head.
The poor deer.
Oh, that poor deer's head." Yeah, I remembered. I don't remember all the details, but right. Chris has a very tender heart.
Yes.
And she was emoting about, "Oh, that poor deer," and she'd refer to it later on as the poor deer's head.
Exactly. Well, one of the things too that Dan really. And I think the whole family really thinks about a lot are your trips to Catalina. You want to talk about that? How that got started, and he remembers about the summer camp that they used to go out, and just the time that you spent out there.
Yes, well, it wasn't a church. I think it was a YM.
Is that what it was?
We had a summer camp at the end of the summer, when there were no more sessions of the boys. Well, then we'd go to family camp, and we'd take the water taxi over from San Pedro. This was back in the 40s, and we'd take the water taxi over from San Pedro, and we'd be a week or 8 or 9 days over there. And I remember that when we first were going over, Stan was in the play yard. We took the play yard over and so forth, and we would take Dan with us most of the time, because Dan was always a delight to be around, and he was enthusiastic and loved the water and so forth. And it was a very nice week to spend over at Catalina. And I had gone over to Catalina the first time when I was working for this engineering company before I started my own business. And the office had a Catalina trip, and this was the Labor Day of 41. Labor Day of 41, yes. And we went over on the old Avalon and stayed in the villas, and it was you don't remember that, but they were just little huts that was down in Avalon, and the big casino was there, and we had Bob Crosby and his Bobcats they were the orchestra at the casino, and this other fella and I who worked, he was another engineer who worked with me at the engineering company, and we were bunked together, and we went over to the casino. We did everything that there was to do there, and went over to the casino and met some girls and had a wonderful time, and so I really fell in love with Catalina then. That was in the first time I'd been over there, and before the war, in Labor Day of '41.
Wow.
Anyway, I've always loved Catalina, and so has Chris and Stan.
Yeah, yeah. And Dan said it's like being out on that island is like being 5,000 miles away from.
It is. Yeah. True.
And he talked about the bay where the camp Orizaba.
Yeah, that White's Cove. Yes.
Now, and he said it's funny that when when he went out there at age 40, it looked exactly like it did when he was age 7.
Right. Yeah. The camp is the same. The dining hall and there's the old chapel back up in the hills, with the log seats and so forth, and Catalina has not changed that much.
Now,
thank goodness.
Yeah. Now, and you also kept your boat out there.
Yes.
Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I would take outboard motors over 2 or 3 times, at family camp, and put them on one of the rowboats there, and maybe, I guess a couple of times, and then it gave me the urge to have a boat, and so in my business, I had we had one building at Pride Products where we had our maintenance department, and I ended up buying a Chris Craft kit boat that was pretty well done, and the guy was supposed to finish it up. He was our printer, but he was building a boat, and he'd fiberglassed it and so forth. Done a good job, but then he was getting a divorce, and he'd left town. He left me with a half-finished. The hull was all done, I hauled it down into our maintenance department, which was a pretty good-sized building, and kept it there. And then I'd have our maintenance guys work on it, when they weren't doing anything else that was productive. And it was a 21-foot Chris Craft kit boat, little cruiser. And then I got a gray marine engine, and it was a rebuilt gray marine engine, and put that in it, and we did the controls and so forth, and that was our boat, and we put that in the water in 1956, I think, and I had that for 2 or 3 years. We take it to Catalina.
You go across?
Oh, sure, yeah, and it was a small 21-foot cruiser. But it was very seaworthy. It was fiberglassed on the outside and had a very reliable engine. And then one time I was back at the market in Chicago, and I guess I looked at the boat ads, and I saw Chris Craft, a 28-foot Chris Craft Constellation for sale. And I called the broker who represented the owner, and it only had about 28 hours on it. The owner was a Midwest sales manager for Shenley Distilleries. I remember that. And he'd taken his wife and I think a customer out on Lake Michigan in it, and they got into a storm. And I guess it scared the heck out of his wife. And she said, "Baby, it's either the boat or me." So he chose Bev June, Beverly June, and I'll never forget because her name was on the transom. It was Bev June, and I had to take that off, and it was a mahogany transom,
Yes.
and I sanded and sanded and sanded to get old Bev June off so that I could put Chris Stan on the back of it. And anyway, we had that for a number of years until I think about 60, I don't know, 67, 66. Yeah, 66. And then I was back at the market, and John, I forget his last name, who was the yacht broker. He was written up in, by the way, just an aside, he was written up on the Times as having a plan to extend the airport. And there was a big article about him and his design in the LA Times, many years ago. But anyway, he was an interesting guy. Sort of, he was way out. He was, he was a genius, but he was a little funky. But he was a nice guy. I remember I gave him a top coat one time. He came out here and to California, and it was really bitterly cold, and he thought it was going to be warm. But
Right.
anyway, that be that as it may. But he called, and they said, let's have lunch together and at the Furniture Club, because that's where I'd met him before, when I bought the Chris Craft. And I said, John, providing one thing, we do not talk about boats. And because I was so busy with Trimble, we were just buying Trimble then. And he said, okay, let's have lunch. So I said, fine. So he came, and we had lunch together at the Furniture Club on Lakeshore Drive in Chicago, and above our Chicago office space. And we were having coffee, and he said, by the way, I just happen to have a couple pictures here. So, being an old boatman, I couldn't help but look, and it was a Pearson, a 38-foot Pearson power boat with a flying bridge, and it was all fiberglass, and the owner had it was a documented Coast Guard because he'd had it down in the Caribbean, through all the islands down there and so forth, and so I knew it was really a good boat, but he wanted a bigger one, and he was anyway. His wife had inherited a lot of money, and so he was looking around for a big trawler type boat. So I said, John, it's I don't want to talk about boats, but I was looking at it and it looked so good. I said, where is the boat? And he said, it's down in Florida. He said, it's at Watergate Marina is where I took it across the bay. It's at in Tampa, Florida, and St. Petersburg, Florida. And so I said, well, I'll take a look at it. I can't help it. So on the way back home, I flew down to Florida, and he had the fellow who was taking care of his boat there, and he'd called him, that I was coming down. So I took the boat out with him, and boy, it maneuvered beautifully, and I love that big high flying bridge. You could steer it from flying bridge and so forth. And so I ended up buying the boat, and then I kept it in Florida for a while so I wouldn't have to pay the sales tax on it. And then we took it across the bay to Houston, Watergate Marina, and I contracted with a big boat hauler to put it on. Well, they had to put on 2 trucks. They took the whole bridge off, and then in some states we had to rent a guard truck, with the flashing lights, because it was too wide for the highways. Anyway, I wouldn't want to have to go through that now, but it worked out just fine. I brought it out and kept that until I sold it a couple of years ago.
Oh, I see. And did you mostly keep it out at Catalina, or where did you keep it when it was out?
No, we kept it at Newport Beach.
Ah, I see.
I kept it at Newport Beach. I was one of the founders of Bahia Corinthian Yacht Club, and we had a marina there, after we built the clubhouse, and I kept it there, and then for most of the time, and then I moved it up to San Pedro, because that was closer to Catalina, and it was cheaper mooring, and it just worked out better, closer for me to, come down from the ranch. And I kept it there at San Pedro for a while, at the San Pedro Yacht Club.
I see. And did you keep the same name each time for the boat?
Oh, yeah. It was Chris Stan.
Chris Stan.
For Chris and Stanley.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, Tooth and...
I had, all three boats were Chris Stan.
That's great. That's great. And, it's interesting that I did talk to Stan, too, to prepare for this. And he had some interesting stories that are kind of like in little bit different time frames, but I think it'd be kind of fun to talk about them. One of the things that Stan remembered in particular was that that you would often go back east to buy your cars. Why was that? Just out of my curiosity. Why?
Well, because I'd be back east. I would spend a lot of time back east. We had a showroom and an office in Chicago on Lakeshore Drive in the furniture building, and also in New York. And I just liked the idea of speccing out. I'd buy the car at a dealership here and then have it all specced out there.
Oh, I see.
And pick it up. And Stan went back with me. They went back two or three times.
Yes.
When we bought new cars.
Right. At one time, he remembers that it was just the two of you.
Just the two of us.
Right. I think I think he said he was about 14. I
think so. That was. I remember that especially because he was weathered in. Here's this little kid, flying alone to go back, and he was weathered in. I was in. I guess I was in Detroit. I can't recall, but anyway, I had to make sure that he was being taken care of all right, because we had to stay overnight, and so I got American Airlines, and they sent somebody to make sure that he got to a hotel all right, and then back. I can't remember the details of it, but then we finally met, and I guess he finally got into Lansing, because this was, maybe it was Detroit. I can't remember, but I think that was a Pontiac Bonneville convertible that I had bought, because I always had convertibles in those days. Yeah.
Well, what Stan remembers in particular that he did mention that a couple different convertibles, like maybe one time you let him drive. I guess he must have been 14 at that time.
That was the time coming out. Yeah, that he drove.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just the two of you?
Just the two of us.
Right,
yeah.
Right. That was a big moment for him.
Yeah, it was a big moment for me too. Stan's always been a good driver. He's not, although he did total one of his little, not MG, Audi, Mini Cooper. You know the Mini Cooper?
Yes.
When he was at college, he did total that out. But he was not injured, I think, and he said that he and another guy had been studying, and then they decided to go out for a milkshake, and they hit a cow pie on the road and skidded off, and anyway, that's the story.
Yeah. He remembered a couple of really funny incidents that you might recall. One involved when the whole family, the four of you, I guess were coming out, and you were on Route 66, I guess it was, and stopped someplace that was like a canyon.
I know what he's going to talk about. That was so funny. Yeah, poor Ellen. And Stan always had a sense of humor, and he'd always like to play tricks on people and kid around, and so it was looking over the Salt River Canyon in Arizona, And we'd stop because we like to stop and see the sights and so forth and get out of the car. And we were driving back in an Olds convertible. That was in '59, I remember.
Mm-hmm.
It was a '59 convertible that we'd picked up back there. And he got up on this ledge, and we couldn't see that it didn't drop right straight off the ledge, that the dirt was, out like, out a ways and before it dropped into the canyon. And he was standing up on the ledge, and then he suddenly made as though he was losing his balance, and he yelled, "Oh!" And then he went off, let himself fall off. And Ellen went almost hysterical, because she thought that he'd gone down in the canyon, because he was lying down on the ground there. And, I couldn't believe that he would, I knew that something was funny there. And so we ran over there, and here was Stan on the ground. So she almost threw him the rest of the way down.
Yeah, Stan said he thought maybe she didn't speak for the rest of the trip.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. And he said there was another time when you guys were out at Catalina, and I guess he was water skiing, and there was it turned out to be a seal, but it looked like a shark.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and Ellen got pretty upset at that, because another time he was water skiing. He wanted to water ski back down to Avalon, and so it was a long ways. We were up at White's at our mooring, and nobody then was paying any attention. Chris and I and Ellen were talking to each other, looking at something else, and then suddenly Chris looked back and said, "Where's Stan?" And and we just saw the line hanging there, and I guess Stan had hit a wave or something, and then he dropped the line, and then I did a 180 and went back, to follow a 180 course, because I couldn't see him either, and then there was this little head that showed up, bobbing in the water. And another time he was swimming, I guess he was water skiing and then swimming up to the boat, and this seal came by, inspecting him, right behind him, and right. Ellen said, "Oh, that's a shark, yeah."
Well, apparently he is a prankster.
He is,
yeah,
very much so.
Well, and he told me another story that I'm sure you'll remember that involved a trip that he really loved, which was apparently he said you and your salesman used to go up to Canada to fish.
Yes.
But one time he got to come along, and he said that it was great. He said he had a wonderful time. It was a float plane and all. But the thing that he remembers, and maybe you remember this too.
I certainly do.
Well, why don't you tell how you remember it?
Well, we had chartered a beaver float plane out of Camel River, and we flew up to an old abandoned lumber barge, and we took an outboard motor, and the pilot had told us that there were a couple of skiffs, already tied up there that we could use, because we knew we wanted to get up someplace where we could get some big fish, and early one morning we hadn't been doing too well there. We'd been getting some smaller fish, but Stan said, "I'm going to go out trolling." And so he took the boat out and was doing some trolling, and Bud and I were in, Bud Olson, who was my salesman in Washington, Oregon. We were on the float and fixing up after breakfast and so forth, and I heard Stan yell, "Dad, I got one. Come out, I need some help." And I thought he was kidding, and I said, yeah, sure you do. We need help down back here, too. And so then he yelled again, and the third time, and I sensed a note of urgency in his voice. And so I said, okay, it better be a big one. And he said, it is, Dad, it is. Hurry up. So Bud and I took the other skiff that was there, and we rowed out, because I think he had the one with a little motor on it, and that we'd brought. And here he had this huge, big 45-pound salmon and it was, he'd gotten it up to the boat, but he couldn't get it in. Yeah. So we got it in with a gaff. Bud gaffed it and threw it into our boat, and it was a bigger salmon, and I've done a lot of salmon fishing, but bigger salmon than I've ever caught. And my biggest one was about a 36-pound. And I have pictures of Stan holding that fish, and he can hardly hold it. And it's as long as his leg, and the tail is still dragging on the ground. But he certainly was, when he said he got a big one, he certainly was not telling an untruth, not telling a fish story.
Well, another story that he mentioned that's a really good one. Now, this one when he's a little bit older, and you and Stan were living together in Marina del Rey, in an apartment in Marina del Rey, and someone had a party and Stan says it wasn't his party, but it was somebody else. You remember this one too?
Yeah, I know.
Well, you tell the story. You can tell the story. See how you remember it. If it differs from him.
Well, I remember I was someplace else, and I can't remember overnight. But I could see that somebody had. But I thought that Stan had the party.
Well, he did. He claimed
he had a party, but he was blamed for the bad party.
Yes, that's
where
right.
They were diving off the balcony. Into the water, and anyway, it was, and I had to go and apologize for my son, for my son's party there, because I had an apartment overlooking the water, and my boat was there at Marina del Rey, and it was a great place for a party.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do remember that. Yeah.
So you guys had to leave that building. Did they throw you out after that? That was his recollection.
No, they didn't. No, I left to go back to Newport. Not long after that.
I see. And Stan was already in school, I guess, at that point.
Yeah, he was at University of Denver, I think then. Over at school, or maybe it was at USC. I can't remember. Yeah, he was in so many schools.
Oh, was he? Well, I'm sure he'll.
I'll have to get him to recollect recollect it the way that he saw it, because the way that he remembered it. But it wasn't that. No, I was not asked to leave. I thought I was going to be asked to leave, but no, I really wasn't. No.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, because he does say he was innocent anyway. It wasn't really his part.
No, no, I guess that's right. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure that's right.
Well, I want to ask, and I'm not sure you want to talk about this, but did you? How did your own personal social life go then? Did you marry again, or how has that part of your life gone after your divorce?
Well, I had a good social life, and I had, I was an eligible bachelor, and I guess I took advantage of it, being an eligible bachelor. And I was dating one gal for a while who was a very nice lady. She was very well connected in Hollywood, in show business, and I met a lot of people through Shirley Rostetter. She played bit parts and so forth. And she was a lovely lady and very charming. She had 2 children, a boy and a girl, and we do a lot together. I dated her for, I guess, a couple of years, but she, through her, I met Cary Grant and, you know, most of the, so many of the screen stars. Zsa Zsa Gabor, I know I irritated Zsa Zsa Gabor because, you know, she's such a fraud anyway, and she was with this, her husband her then husband was this little guy who had lots of money, and he was just like a little puppy dog, you know, around with her. And she didn't treat him very well, and when I was talking to her, I guess I said something that insulted her. I didn't really mean to, but she she almost walked away. But I did. I've met a lot of screen people, and through, not that I'm impressed with them, but I remember one time, I'll have to tell you about this. This one fellow who was really obnoxious, and he was at so many parties, but he was just a hanger-on. And he was having a book written, and you know, when Chris told me that you were going to do a video, you know, of my life, quote unquote, I harked back to that he was having a book written about his life, you know, and he was a nobody, and he was just a hanger-oner, you know, would go to all of the parties because one of Shirley's friends was in the business of introducing people from the East who wanted to meet people in Hollywood, and so she would have parties, and then Shirley would always be invited to those parties, and she had great parties, you know. She'd take over Rock Hudson's place and, you know, so forth.
Yes.
And this guy was always one that was invited because he could be very, very charming. He would sit, I remember one time I was talking to him, and he would, all right, I've charmed you, now you charm me, you know, stuff like that. Anyway, he was having a book written, and he said, but I just don't know what the title about his life. And he said from the time that he was an infant until now, or, you know, a child until now.
Right.
And he said, I don't know what the title should be. Can anybody help? And this is one of the times when the great line that I didn't come up with at the time.
Yes, right.
Because, you know, when just a few minutes later, I was thinking, why didn't I come up with this? And I was going to say, well, I should have said, well, with apologies to Charles Darwin, why don't you call it Origin of the Feces? But anyway, I didn't come up with it in time.
Oh, that's funny. So that's kind of what you thought maybe you would be doing here with this video portrait? That you were kind of along the same category as that guy, talking about your life?
Yeah, I didn't. I wasn't sure just what was going on, but it's. But you're giving me a lot of prompting.
Good.
You know,
good.
You must have talked to a lot of my family.
I did.
Yeah.
I did. Yeah, they all wanted to talk. I'm not sure
Great.
we'll get to everything that they brought up. But, you know, there's so many things that one of the things that they talked about were things that they associate with you, things that you have always liked to do that maybe, photography is one thing. Apparently that's been a big interest of yours, huh? You want to talk about that a little?
Well, no, I've always enjoyed cameras, photography and cameras, and I I have boxes, I mean big boxes of slides that someday I'm going to have, when I retire,
Right.
quote unquote,
Right.
I'm going to sort out and throw probably 95% away, but I do have some very good ones because I have some that were taken in Berlin before the wall was built, and this was in 59. Let's say I was in Europe in 55, and then in 59 I went back on a trip with our production manager, who was a Norwegian fellow. We were thinking about a plant over in Denmark, and he talked me into it, and he met me over there, and we were wined and dined by the Danish Industrial Commission, and had a great time. Anyway, that's another story. But I was in Berlin, and it was in a camera store buying. I was using Leica cameras at that time, and I was buying a lens, and this young lady came in, and she had a problem with her camera, and while the fellow was back behind, I looked, and she said, "Do you know why it's doing this?" And I forget just what it was, but anyway, I helped her adjust it the way she wanted. And so I was talking to her, and she lived in Washington, D.C., and she was here with her aunt, and they were visiting her aunt's very good friend, her name was Frau Schugart, and she was head of the Fellowship of Reconciliation between East and West. Oh. And she was a wonderful lady. Her husband had been a professor at Berlin University, and he was killed. I don't know whether Nazis got him or whether he was killed in war, but anyway, he was killed during World War II. And she said, "If you're not doing anything tonight, we're going to the opera over the Staatsoper, which is in East Berlin." This is before the wall was built. The wall was not built until 62, I think, and this was in 59. And we had to go through Checkpoint Charlie, and I said, "Well, I'd be delighted." And so we went over into East Berlin because her aunt's friend, Frau Schugart, could go any place, in East Berlin, wherever. And so we went to dinner over there, and had terrible food, and in East Berlin, yeah. and then I went to the opera, Staatsoper, and then we did a lot. The next day, Frau Schugart hired a car, and we went all through East Berlin to places that otherwise you couldn't go. And there was with one of the main streets, it was an extension of Unter den Linden, yes. Which was they called Stalin Alley, and that of course has been changed since yes. then. But it was amazing that we could get out and see. It was a very wide street, and the buildings were just facades. And there was merchandise in the center, in the windows, but we drove around the back, and I have pictures of this. The huge big poles holding up the front facade, and there was nothing in the back. And the communists had built this so that they could take the dignitaries down the street. Look at what we're doing. Look at the stores. The people have all of these goods and so forth. And there was nothing. It was just a facade. And East Berlin at that time was still full of rubble, and we just bombed the dickens out of it. Yeah, yeah. And then I was also in Dresden, after the terrible bombing that went on. That beautiful city was just ruined. And I have pictures of so much. And I drove through Yugoslavia. We drove. Had a lot of interesting experiences. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and travel then has been a big part of your interest in your life.
Travel has been, yes, a very big part of my life.
Are there other trips that you've taken that are memorable, like the Berlin one?
Oh, yes. I would say Another time I was crossing the North Sea from Sweden over to Sassnitz in East Germany, and that was after I had bought a car in Wolfsburg, a new Volkswagen, not the little Bug, but the bigger fastback, and that the guards there wouldn't let me go through because I didn't have an East German license plate on. And you know where Sassnitz is? It's
exactly,
a port up in north, in what used to be Eastern Germany.
I see.
And and they said, no go. And of course they put things under my car, you know, mirrors under my car to check. We've had that happen any number of times when Maggie and I were going all through Eastern Europe many years later. But and with the license, he said no go, and 9, and so then I found I had to buy one of their license plates, you know, and so I bought their license plates. I had some Deutschmarks, Eastern marks, and but they wouldn't give me any. I said the holes wouldn't match. You know, I showed them. They said, and so I got a rock and a nail. Found a nail, a rusty nail, and I was pounding the rock through with the nails to make holes that would match the holes in the car for that license plate. And then those SOBs, they came running out, Achtung, Achtung. So then they went back in and brought a hammer and a screwdriver. You know, and that was typical of what's going on over there.
Right, exactly. That's right.
But we've done a lot of traveling. I think I've been to most of the world's major capitals. We were just in India a couple months ago, and that was my last one in New Delhi. But we've been in Beijing and the major South America, well, not too many in South America, but in Moscow and all through the capitals of Europe, hitting all of those, and through China and India, and well, anyway, we've done a lot of traveling. Australia.
And you know, it seems as if physical fitness has been a big part of your life. That I mean, even here you were stretching while we were taking a break. Have you really worked to keep yourself in good condition, or?
Not enough.
No.
Not recently, because I need to get more exercise, and I need to devote more time to staying physically fit. But I was physically fit up until two things happened. One was my ski accident, this last ski accident that shattered this leg and took all the muscle power out of it. And the second was I drove a forklift off my loading dock, and I came very close to being killed on that. And I have titanium plates in my face here, and my eye never is focused right. I've had many operations at Doheny Eye Clinic down at USC Hospital on it, and I've never, and I had a very, very sincere, extreme fracture and concussion then. I guess I've never been right since.
And that was recently then?
Well, that was, the ski accident was 2 years ago, I think, and the forklift accident was 3 years ago, I think.
I see. And, you know, they mentioned, too, that you have a great love, two things that your family talked about that you have a great love in. One you mentioned earlier is poetry, and the other classical music. You want to talk about how that came to be in your life?
Well, my parents enjoyed classical music, and my very dear friend Ed Montaigne, who was as close to me as at that time as my brother Stan, really not as close, but we spent more time together, Ed and I, because we were a comparable age.
Right.
He and his family really loved classical music, and I'll have to give you an example of two examples. One time, Ed was at Miami University, and I was at Ohio State, and we wanted to go up to the Cleveland Opera, which was a Metropolitan on tour. And so he hitchhiked up to Columbus, and we hitchhiked up to Cleveland, where at the Cleveland Public Auditorium, the Metropolitan Opera was on tour. And we both enjoyed Traviata, Verdi's Traviata. And we didn't have any tickets, and it was very difficult to get tickets. We were able to get tickets to La Gioconda in the afternoon, but we couldn't get tickets. And Gladys Swarthout, we met her on an elevator at the Hotel Cleveland, and she was a singer, and she was there with her husband, and they were able to get it. We told her that we'd hitchhiked up from Columbus to go to the opera, but we couldn't get tickets. And so they were able to get us tickets, show us how to get tickets to La Gioconda. Matter of fact, I think they gave them to us. And then we could get one ticket. We had one ticket. Maybe they gave us the one ticket. That's all they had to Traviata. And so Ed and I, there are two of us. What are we going to do? We can't tear the ticket in two. But
Right.
Ed and I decided that we would try to get in with the one ticket. And so we got into the vestibule, with all the people milling around.
Yep.
And then we walked down a stairs exit, and we got down below, and we thought we could get into the auditorium. And we couldn't get up into the upper auditorium at that time. So everybody else by the time, and then we got into the vestibule, and everybody else at that time had their tickets already torn off, because they had come in through the door. I guess that was it. We'd gotten in through a side door, I can't remember just what. But so then we had one good ticket. And then we flipped a coin to see who would get the part of the ticket with the seat on it. And Ed won. And so he said, "Well, good luck, John," And he said, "No," he said, "I really shouldn't have." But he said, "I'm going to take it," because he won the toss.
Yeah.
We flipped a coin or something. And so I had a plan, and had been raining, and I had my raincoat with me, my top raincoat. And so I waited until the first act was just ready to start. I guess they were playing the prelude, and I rushed up to the balcony, one balcony up, and up to the door, and I handed, as though I was really in a rush, I handed him the ticket that didn't have a seat mark on it. And he said, "There's no seat mark on this. You hand me the wrong ticket." I said, "I guess they tore the wrong one off at the door." I said, "I've been late, and they knew I was in a rush. I don't understand." And he looked, and he said, "Oh, I'm sorry about that." And so he said, "If you wait just a minute until the prelude is over, I'll find a seat for you." And so I ended up in the first row of the balcony. Beautiful seat, you know, right in the middle.
Oh, that's great.
And Ed was killed. He was a captain in the tank corps, and he was killed in Brittany. But another story of Ed and my music endeavors, the Cincinnati Opera was a Cincinnati Zoo Opera, had the Metropolitan Players come in, you know, and part of on their tour in the summer, and Aida was playing, and my whole family went down. My brother and 2 sisters, and I guess even Paul, my 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and I was working. I think I was working on my road job then, you know, with the county engineer inspector, and I couldn't go down with them. But I said, Ed and I will be down later. So we got there later. Ed picked me up, and we got to the opera later, and to the door there, and we had tickets. You know, everything was fine because I wasn't trying to pull any shenanigans there. And I can't remember whether this is before or after Cleveland, but somebody rushed around from the stage, from backstage, and said, 2 of our supers are missing. Have you seen them? And Ed had a good sense of humor, and he said, well, were they? And he looked us over, and he said, follow me. And so I said, could you wait just a minute? And I went down to tell my folks. I said, we're in the opera. Watch us. And so then I went back, and we followed the super around, and he gave us the shields and the cloth, you know, the loin cloth.
Yeah.
And if you remember Aida, and the spear, and they said, just keep time to the music. You don't have to sing. But we moved our lips, and Ed had a good voice, and I could hear him singing beside me. And I have a terrible voice, and so I didn't. But anyway, we played in Aida as one of Radame's soldiers coming back up from Egypt.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Well, let me ask, how your company was sold to the conglomerate in the late '60s. What did you go right then into the business of raising oranges, or what was the story on that?
That's called a mid-course correction, I guess. Well, after it was sold, I stayed on as president, but I was no longer chairman, and I'd look at equipment, and there was a boss that I had to answer to, and I had to make 5-year projections, 2-year projections, 6 months projections, submit them to the headquarters back in Chicago, and it was just not the same. And it just wasn't the same as owning my own business.
Right.
And so, and I didn't care for the guy who was out here in charge of the company out here, because we didn't go by that name. But anyway, Verco. But anyway, I stayed on for about a year and a half, and then left. And I traded my stock for what was left of my stock for debentures, and cashed out, and then got into some very bad deals. And at an advanced age, I was 50 years old then, and I lost most of my money. And you know what I hadn't lost in the sale, and then the trading the stock for conglomerate for debentures, and I got into the manufactured housing business, and I dabbled in not dabbled but jumped into commodities trading, and I got into the clutches of some fast-talking investment brokers, and I did some stupid things, But my tax man, in the meantime, had said, "You're paying too many taxes," and I certainly agreed with him. He said, "You need to get a tax shelter." He said, "Why don't you buy a couple of orange groves?" And at that time, oranges were a good tax shelter. Little did I know that they would drain your money too. And so I bought my cousin, who was back getting his PhD degree at University of Michigan. I knew had some orange groves, and he'd bought an orange grove up in Tulare County. But I just didn't know that he was up there, but I knew that he had a couple down here. His father had that he was taking care of. And well, he was a teacher and getting his PhD in biology back east. A very knowledgeable, very nice guy. And so I called and talked to his brother, who was in Laverne, and Stan, his brother's name, said, "Well, Dave is back east at the University of Michigan, but," he said, "Dave and I have a grove a very nice grove up in Springville, California." I said, "Where's Springville?" He said, "It's up outside of Porterville." And so I said, "Well, do you want to sell it?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "We'd love to. We're over our heads in it." And so I met him and saw some pictures of it, and we talked, and I decided to buy it without even seeing the groves. And then Chris and I went up for the first time to see it, and there were lakes in the property, and there big ponds, and we found, no, maybe it was Stan and I who went up, but we found there were, I guess, Dave or Stan and his wife, my cousin Stan, not my son Stan. We found them in one of the ponds swimming, and there was a boat on it, and then there were other ponds. There were 3 other ponds, and a nice grove. And boy, I thought, sure, I'll buy it. So I bought half of it from them, and they each kept 25%. Then I bought Stan's 25%, 75%. Then I kept buying more property. Then I bought a bunch of property over the hill, another ranch, and I ended up with about 650 or so acres, 648 acres up there. Not all, some of it was hillside property, but it was beautiful. I loved it. But I became land poor, and I wasn't getting any income from the oranges to speak of, and they were dealing with Sunkist, and so I said, well, I can do better than that. So I built a packing house, and got machinery and so forth from another packing house that we're getting rid of it, and I brought a guy in to run the packing house, and then that didn't work out too well. And Stan, my son, ran the packing house for a while, and we weren't doing very well. But anyway, then Stan left and went up to work with Chris's husband, Don, and. So he said, "Dad, you better stick around." He said, "You can do well in this business." And Stan had set up a lot of the paperwork and so forth. So, but it needed a lot of help, and so I got into it, and I found I liked it. And we grow chemical-free fruit, and I expanded our customer list, and then I got the Japanese. I had a broker that knew the Japanese, and I went over to Japan, and we met some of our customers over there and established a good rapport with the Japanese. And and then I expanded the packing house, and anyway, it has worked out very, very well. I sold a lot of the property off, and I buy oranges from 2 other organic growers up there in the foothills, and I'm having, people say, why don't you retire? We have a lot of friends up at Mammoth. We have a place up at Mammoth, and they say, why don't you retire? Go up here, say skiing with Maggie. Well, for one thing, I can't ski. I decided, my doctor said discretion's the better part of valor. He said, John, I've always encouraged you to ski, but he said, now with that leg, he said, I really wouldn't trust it. And he said, if you break that with it, once more, you're in a wheelchair or crutches. And so I don't ski anymore. And Maggie says, I refer to Maggie, you know who I'm talking about.
Well, you can explain it, but I believe I know who it is.
But anyway, she's my ex-wife, but we still live together and so forth. She just didn't like it up on the ranch. She said, you're always working, you work too hard, and you're not paying any attention to me. And anyway, but she said, I don't understand it. He said, you can't. I said, I really need something to do, Maggie. And that's what I tell my friends up at Mammoth. Everybody else is retired up there and doing lots of good things, and I enjoy that too. But I also enjoy what I'm doing, and it's productive. I feel that I'm doing something. We get letters from people all over the country saying they've never tasted a good orange until they've tasted ours, and I don't work too hard. I have a very good manager, Joe Juarez, who I rely on him completely, and I don't worry when I'm away. I don't worry about what's going on there, and so it's working out fine.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. I'm going to pause. Well, just to kind of come to a conclusion, it seems like you. One of the things that seems to have been a real characteristic of your whole life is the connection to the family. I know you still have a lot of family reunions and stuff like that. You want to talk about what family has meant to you, how you would express it in your own experience?
Are you talking about my immediate family, my children, or my expanded family, my brothers and sisters and cousins? And
yeah, actually, it's interesting that it seems like your grandsons and your daughter have said how close you and your siblings are.
Yes.
And then how close you and your grandsons are, and how close you and Dan are. I mean, so I guess, I don't know.
Well, I'm very fortunate. The Lord has blessed me with a wonderful family, and I have regrets that I haven't been able to spend more time. That I could have spent more time if I'd given up some of my business pursuits. I have regrets that first of all, I do regret that Ellen and I were ever divorced. And secondly, I regret that I didn't spend more time with my children as they were getting into their teenage years and on up from there. They've turned out fine. I have not complaints. Chris, I am doubly blessed with Chris. She's a wonderful, wonderful daughter, and I love her and I respect her, and she's everything that any father could ask of a daughter. My son Stan, I love very much. Stan has a few problems now and then, but we won't dwell on them. And Stan has some wonderful children. My grandson, Stan's 3 sons, are terrific kids. I'm very proud of them. My brothers and sisters were very close. Although we're not immediate neighbors, we do talk on the telephone a great deal and keep in touch with each other. We have family reunions. We had one great reunion up in Alaska that Chris and Stan attended, where we flew into, we chartered a Twin Otter plane and flew into a place that two of my nephews have, a place called Myers-Chuck. They have an island up there. And we had a great reunion up there. And it was interesting that some good friends of ours were on a large yacht, the Panacea, which was docked right by my nephew's fishing boat. We didn't know about that until 3 or 4 years ago, when our friends stopped by to see us there on the ranch, and they said, well, Myers-Chuck, we were talking about being in Alaska and up at Myers-Chuck. They said, well, we were docked in Myers-Chuck, and they said, oh, you're the ones that flew in on that plane that came in, twice, because I think it was two of them that were chartered. And they said, that's very interesting because we were tied up right behind the Sentinel, which is my nephew's fishing boat that he keeps up there. And he said, or they said that we couldn't understand how a fisherman way up in Alaska could be playing all the classical music that we hear coming off the Sentinel boat. Yeah, which was that was an aside. You didn't need to put that down on tape.
Though. That's perfect. That's a perfect story. Oh, that's great.
But anyway, yeah, I'm very lucky that that I have the siblings and I have Dan, excuse me, to represent my deceased brother.
Well, is there anything that you would say, that maybe no one ever told you as a young person that you would like to pass on to your grandsons and your family? Something that you just think it would have been good if you had known it?
There are a number of things. I could be very clever. I mean, I wish I were more clever, but I really would have to think about that a while. Just read a lot, read some good books. Don't neglect people like Thoreau and some of the philosophers, and just enjoy every day. And be productive and be loving. It's a very simple bit of philosophy, but I'm almost speechless when it comes to voicing something that is pretty important. Such as this. No, I would say just continue the course. Follow the course that you're on.
That's great. Anything else you would like to add before we finish?
Well, I very much enjoyed talking to you, Gene, and I think you're doing a great job. I'm sorry that I lost my voice. A couple of my voice is harsh from maybe a couple of days ago when I had a little problem with my throat. But I've enjoyed it, and it's been so nice to review some of the things that happened in my life that my family has reminded me about, and maybe to elaborate on them, maybe elaborate too much, I don't know, but it's been a real pleasure, Gene, and thank you very much. And thank you, family. I love you all. God bless you.